Welcome back, book nerds. This is Library Card, the show for people who want to think deeply about what the books they read and get inspired to read more. I'm Megan Gliona. I'm here with Brian Brinkman and RJB. And today we're talking about a book that was shortlisted for the Booker in 2024. We're talking about The Safekeep by Yael Wouden. It's a debut novel that absolutely floored me, and we're going to get into that soon. But first, I want to know what you guys are reading. RJ, what are you reading right now? Today. What are you reading today?
Today, well, as of like an hour ago, I was reading a new book called Saints of the Narrow Street, which I think is, I've only read like 2 pages because I just finished a book today. But Saint of the Narrow Street is it's like a Brooklyn crime novel. So I think that's going to be good. It's like compared to Richard Price in terms of like style. And so I think it'll be good. I just finished a book that I mentioned to you both earlier today, Dream Hotel, which I was the author of Dream Hotel was a Pulitzer finalist for The Moore's Account, Layla Lalami. So like I knew it was going to be good because that seems hard to do that, but it's really great. It's like a near future, almost, definitely dystopian, but not in like the scary, sparse sense, that you think of when you think of like the future where like the digital world takes over the human world in terms of our experiences. It's like very much very, very near future. Like everything in the world is the same. Like people go to work and there's like probably more natural disasters, but it's like it's a generally like a world that's comfortable to be in for a book, but it's where like basically an algorithm determines if people are going to potentially commit a crime, especially the people who have like voluntarily got this implant to help them sleep better, but then also the company that does the implant then can like monitor your dreams. So this woman like is coming home from a conference in London to LA, and then she is like pulled aside, and so she ends up in this like they call it a retainment facility. The Risk Assessment Administration is like the organization. So it's like it's very Orwellian, but actually like really fun to read, and a really interesting look at like the dystopian future technology wise without it being like too depressing or too heavy handed. It's like a nice balance of like literature and timeliness. But it was like a read with Jenna book, so it was a little bit like, is this going to be, like kind of cheesy or something? But it was really great. I think you guys should read it.
I feel like I've read something of hers, but I don't remember what it was.
Not the Moore's Account.
I don't think so. I don't remember. I'll have to look it up. But did you read the Morse account?
No.
Yeah,
but
I didn't read that either. Okay, I'm going to check that out.
I love the idea of a trade-off between sleeping and willingly showcasing if you're going to commit a crime. It feels like just a great metaphor for what we're experiencing right now with our own technology in our own world.
And we don't have to talk about this book anymore, but I in like the acknowledgments and whatnot, she was like talking about how much she read about like the idea of dreams and that the thoughts behind dreams, because obviously like dreams are so, at least my dreams are pretty much nonsensical, so like the idea that you could like by monitoring someone's dreams understand their intentions in real life is like both kind of stupid but also kind of interesting if you think about it as something where you really could, if you had the right combination of background and data, and not like, could you? I don't know. Anyway, it's a pretty wild book.
It reminds me of that quote from the Goose song, "I'd rather feel it all than sleep anymore." I think I definitely would not be getting that implant. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Although it does help you sleep really well. So that's the trade-off.
Well, there's the trade-off. Yeah.
I will take the implant to avoid sleep altogether.
Yeah, Brian's going to do the opposite.
It's like 7 wasted hours. What are we doing?
What are we doing?
Every day? Every day?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Life.
My
Half your
God.
life.
What are we doing?
Brian, what are you reading? When you're not sleeping.
Well, I too just started a book. that I think you guys have both read. Tom Robbins' Fierce Invalids Home from Hot Climates. It's a mouthful to read on the page and say out loud. First time I've done that. I'm like 30, 40 pages and I got a ways to go here, but I'm loving the language. This is the first Tom Robbins book I've read. Um, I feel like I make this comp a lot, but I think it's really apt here. I feel very much of like that Vonnegut influence of sarcasm mixed with, just overt humor, absurdism, commentary on political power, commentary on the role of shadowy enterprises in the world. I'm really digging it. There are moments where I'm like, I don't know what the fuck this guy is saying right now, and then like I reread something, and then it all kind of comes to light, and then I keep reading, and he like has these like 4 or 5 lines in a row that just like have me in total stitches. So I'm definitely digging this. The last book I read was very dense and pretty dry, and was a bit of a challenge for me to get through to the end. So this is solving that kind of rebound issue, if you will. You try to
Mhm.
read books, you read a book. It's always this challenge. You read a really good book, and you're like, "Fuck, I don't ever want to read anything ever again because it might screw up the way I feel right now." But then you read kind of a book you don't love, and you're like, "The next one better be great, or I may never do this again." So we're right there. I also will say,
That's me like every week, Brian. It's like going through that
Because
cycle
you read a
of
book
like,
a week.
it's like, God, I don't want this to end, or I can't wait for this book to be over so I can read something else. But that's not as satisfying of a feeling as like reading something great and then like wondering, will the next book be this good? It's a great feeling.
I mean,
It's the best
I, I
feeling.
just I just go back to the way I felt during the last 100 pages of the bee sting when I was like,
Mm.
I really like, I don't want to go to sleep without finishing this book because I don't know when I'm going. Like, how do you go to sleep in the last 100 pages of that book? But I was also like, but if I read this book to the end, I wake up tomorrow and I don't have any more of this book to read. Like, what am I going to do? And we'll
Did
talk about it
you finish
today.
that book at your sister's wedding?
My mom did, yes.
Your mom did? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought someone was like sneaking off and reading that book during your sister's
Yeah.
wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I read I forget what maybe I watched a movie just to keep myself occupied. But as we'll talk about today, I mean this one that we're going to get into um was one of those that I was just like, I hope this is good, and then very much I don't ever want this to end. So we'll see how that goes. I also am reading, I just want to note, RJ, I think that you should put this on your list. Meg, I would recommend that you read this, but who knows if you will. It's nonfiction and it's about baseball. It's called the year. It's called the Year of the Pitcher. It's about the 1968 baseball season, focusing mainly on Bob Gibson and the St. Louis Cardinals, Don McClain and the Detroit Tigers, and what was happening from uh, uh, civil rights, racial standpoint in the 60s, the Vietnam War, the changing economy, political assassinations, how this was reflected and refracted in baseball, but then also this rise throughout the 1960s of these dominant pitchers like Gibson, like Sandy Koufax, like Don Drysdale, so on and so forth, who basically made it impossible for hitters to hit, so much so that after the 1968 season, they lowered the mound, changed a few rules to bring more offense back into the game. So, as with life, baseball evolves, it changes, it grows, and I'm pretty into these like books that give you a snapshot of the season plus also the history around it because there's so much America in baseball, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, I'm
Awesome.
probably not going to read that, but it sounds really
Yeah.
amazing. I love that for you. This is
Good.
where our reading diverges. That's it. That's the point. But I'm really relating to you guys because I think I'm about to abandon my current read. I think it's
You've been
happening
saying that for
tonight.
days.
I know. I
I'm like,
know.
when are you gonna just do it?
Well, because I was like away and I didn't have another book with me. I had another book with me, but I finished it, so I didn't have another book to read. And this book it's called Butter by Asako Yuzuki, and it's a popular book from Japan. And it's about a suspected serial killer who's imprisoned for the deaths of 3 men. And the book is about this journalist who's trying to get an interview with her. And it's trying to get into some interesting questions about femininity and misogyny and societal expectations of women in Japan and how we think about and experience food. But I find the writing just kind of boring. And there's supposed to be like this undercurrent of like desire and eroticism, but I find those parts are written really fairly thin and it's not as absorbing as it should be, especially at this moment when I revisited the Safekeep, which does this immaculately. So it's been hard for me to get into, and maybe it's the translation, I don't know, but I find myself skimming as I'm reading it,
Mm,
which is
that's
never a
never a
good
good
thing.
sign. Nope.
It's never a
Nope.
good thing. So I'm halfway through it though. So I'm just like, do I
Like just cut it. Just cut your losses. There's no
yeah.
time for reading boring writing. Sorry.
I know. And I have jury duty on Wednesday, so I really need to go in with like a great
No,
book. So I'm gonna have
it's
like
not
Yeah, you
7
do.
happening.
hours to sit and
I'm
read.
not gonna allow it. I mean,
Okay.
Brian and I can't allow it. It's not allowed.
Okay.
I do think that it's an interesting thought experiment for a future episode of like bringing books that you abandoned and like looking up
Mm.
what positive reviews were and like kind of going back and forth on that versus bringing books that you didn't abandon. Like now that I finished reading In the Distance, I'm like, did I actually accomplish something? Because that could have been a whole nother book. Like there could have been a different book I read in there. And as I think about the way that book ended, I'm like, yeah, of course it ended that way. And I'm kind of happy with the ending, but I'm also like, what did I get out of this? What was the point of all of this? So I think you're going through that right now.
So you feel like you missed something, or you are curious about like why it didn't hit you?
I'm more curious about the latter. I feel I got it all. Like when I got to the ending, it made complete sense what he was
Mm.
doing. There was just never a point where it like clicked for me of like, oh, that's what he was going on about for the last 200 pages. And that's like what you were supposed to feel this way and then have it click. It was kind of like the White Lotus season where it's just like, okay, cool. You did nothing until the last 10 minutes and then finally said, hey, here's some interesting plot points.
See, okay, well, a couple things, Brian. First, it's going to be much harder to get us to discuss trust on this podcast now because now you don't want to read him for a while, and like we need to all read it.
But that's the thing, is that I felt the same way when I finished Trust.
Yeah.
I've continued to think about it, which will be interesting to see if you continue to think about in this book. But
Why
I
don't we
did
do
not like large parts of it.
Why don't we do a special episode on exploration of Hernan Diaz via Trust and In the Distance? I'm sure that like I'm not going to spoil anything for you guys. You're not going to spoil anything for us. The guy is a very impressive writer. I just didn't feel anything reading what he was writing. It sounds like you guys had a similar
Yes.
experience.
Well, I didn't feel that way with Trust. I liked it. I mean, I probably
You
think
liked it more than me.
Yeah, but I think I was probably annoyed for parts of it. I didn't think that nothing happened though. I thought it was mostly like there were other issues with it. But yeah, it's interesting. I think maybe we should.
Yeah.
But
I
also
think we should.
Stuff happens. I just didn't care, I guess, is
Well,
the
that's
better
the
way to
thing.
put it.
You don't care about the people. And also, to me, Trust, whatever, we're going down a real tangent, but Trust needed like 150 pages taken out of it, I think, in the middle.
And that's an interesting point because now I think about this could have been a short story, a very effective short story. Like you think about the short story we talked about last week. Had this been 75 pages, 75 meaty pages, really impressive idea there. I don't know if that worked for 250 pages.
Okay, so well, I wanted to say something about Rebecca, but we should just move on because we got to get to the Safekeep.
You know, I do think Rebecca is a good thing to talk about this week, though, because there are a lot of parallels to this book and Rebecca. And what I liked about both books, and it was an inspiration for this book. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did hear that.
But we can wait because I really want Brian to read Rebecca because I really think we should talk about Rebecca on the podcast.
Wow.
Because I'm here for it if you didn't love it. RJ didn't love it, but it's one of my favorite books.
I didn't say I didn't love it. I think it was like the White Lotus.
Yes, you did.
I said that the first 3 quarters were scene setting for the plot, which started in the last quarter.
Oh, sorry. I interpreted that as not loving it. How silly of me.
I did enjoy
You
it though.
There are lots of 3.0 fish shows like that, where it's just a lot of scene setting, and then
Yeah.
cool, we play like 4 good songs in a row to end the second set.
Don't listen to him, Brian, though. He's wrong about Rebecca.
I liked it. Okay.
Okay, should we
I don't know
let's
what
get
else to
into the
say.
Safekeep. We'll talk
Let's
about
do it.
Rebecca when we talk
Because
about it.
this is
We're
one
not
that we all
interested.
loved. This is one we all loved.
We did.
I just
think
said
so.
it. I just assumed, but yes, we all loved this. RJ?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, amazing. I'm still like, I think I had it as number 3 in 2024. I might move it up to 2 at this point, but
Mhm.
I'm still actually pretty annoyed that Orbital won the Booker Prize over it. I'm sorry.
Really?
Interesting.
I think
That's
it's better.
interesting.
I think it's better.
It's interesting because in the moment I was struck harder by Orbital, but I was looking at my Goodreads this week and I only put this at 4 stars. But it's so annoying because they don't have half, which is just because
Yeah.
I think I definitely would have. But I do think this is, on reflection and looking back at it this week, I do think this is a 5-star book. I think I was wrong.
I think so too. I
Yeah.
think it definitely is.
I gave it 5. I read Orbital and this. I don't know if it was back to back or if I had Long Island Compromise in there, but somewhere in the early part of the year was Orbital and Safekeep, and both in very different ways, but hit me just as hard.
Okay. Well, let's get into it. The story is set in a rural Dutch province 15 years after the end of World War II, and it centers around Isabel, who lives alone in her dead mother's home, meticulously caring for the house and its objects. You get the sense that this woman's life would have remained very controlled and small had her brother Louis not allowed his new girlfriend to move into the house that he is due to inherit. And Louis's girlfriend, Eva, she upends Isabel's world when they develop an irresistible attraction to each other. This attraction really complicates Eva's real intentions for wanting to be in the house in the first place, which those intentions are slowly revealed as the story unfurls. And similar to what we were just saying, I loved this book. And this is the kind of book I'm always looking for. I read it last fall. I'm still thinking about it. And I was telling Brian before we went live, I was so excited to talk to you about this book that I didn't really know where to start. It's like when you have someone you want to see and you want to talk to them about stuff and you don't even know where to begin. But I decided to start with the title and one of the book's themes. So this idea of safekeeping and this idea of preserving something in a safe place. And in the beginning of the book, Isabel is talking about the china dishes, and she says they are for touching. I'm sorry, they're not for touching, they are for keeping. And I think this double entendre that she's putting there is so beautifully done because, van der Wouden's talking about how Isabel is so obsessed with preservation and this idea of not allowing things to be used and enjoyed, but instead kept safe. And in this story, I think there's a lot of this idea of safety, and there's like a macro level about what's been going on in the world, and that these families couldn't keep each other safe, they couldn't keep their homes safe, they couldn't keep their children safe. And then there's this micro level with Isabel, which she experienced that as a child. And so now she is all about control. And Eva comes in and forces her to lose control and kind of act outside of the rules she's put in place for herself. And one thing I thought about this book that was really amazing is that it really works on like a macro and a micro level. So, Brian, I want to know what you thought about this idea of safekeeping as a theme and her ability to paint larger themes while also giving us an intimate story with rich character development.
I mean, yeah, I think that's it. When I was thinking about like who would I recommend this book to, there's like 3 levels of it. You could say to someone who loves World War II, quote unquote, historical fiction. Apologies. there, but someone who like they live in that world where everything that they read is somehow, or movies they watch are somehow tied to World War II, of which there's an entire industry. This could fit very nicely into that sort of category. This could also fit for someone who likes a bit of mystery in their books and likes that from a thematic standpoint, because there is this kind of an unveiled mystery that happens throughout the book. But then also on a much smaller scale, if you just want a character driven book and you don't really care who the characters are, you just love reading about people as they're in really challenging positions in their lives, this works really nicely in that sort of standpoint. And I think that, the fact that it's from an economic standpoint, I mean, it's like 270 pages and it gets these three major themes across without giving you too much background, but giving you just enough, that ever present context that I am after. Give me a sense of where we're at. This book does this over and over and over again, but not too much to the point that you're like, okay, I get it. I get what's going on. But I think, the idea of, because I was thinking a lot when I was reading this about um, my relationship with my siblings and what would happen and what will happen whenever we get to a point where health issues take over my parents' lives, or one or both of them are gone, and one of us has to, move forward with taking care of everything that they have, taking care of their memories and that sort of standpoint, taking care of their estate, and where those responsibilities would unfold. And I think you really get a sense here from a immediate character standpoint of who all these people are, and it gives you a lot of ability to kind of relate to your own life. But then also, when you think about on a macro scale, how Europe emerged from World War II, how Europe rebuilt itself, how it positioned itself to both, in some cases, honor what had happened, but in other cases, move on entirely. You get that real battle that must have been in, from a nationalistic standpoint, throughout this book. So, as you can see, I mean, there's every step of this book is filled with layers. The last thing I would say, and we'll get into this from just a, relationship standpoint between the two main characters, this idea of, safekeeping purity, safekeeping yourself for someone that you truly care about. You get that kind of tension throughout the entirety of this book until it ultimately boils over. But RJ, did you have similar takeaways? Anything different from your end?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any of the same thoughts that you just described, so that's good. Just
That's
just in terms of
amazing.
how I related to it, but the multi like faceted, the title and the thematic overlay of the idea is pretty amazing, and really, to me, is like a masterful plot, design, because
Totally.
that's the different layers of that are revealed throughout the story, and I think it's wild, and like we've talked about, it's crazy that this is her first book. I mean, it's phenomenal, and I think like the writing is great, but like the main character is so well, like you can see her, like just from the beginning when she's like so uptight and going to the dinner with her brother, and like you can see yourself at the table with them, and you can see what she looks like, and there's like the descriptors and how she's like, picking her nails and like, moving around uncomfortably in her clothes, and it's just like it's such a well crafted character that it's
Oh,
wild, and that's just like the
that
very beginning.
that one, she pinches her skin on her hand,
Yeah, yeah,
and as an actor, that is like being able to zone in and pick on a specific behavior like that. That's what I would always try to do as an actor, and that's what great actors do. Is sometimes characters will have some sort of repetitive motion or some tick or some behavior that they do, whether it's like squinting or squeezing the skin on their hands, and it is indicative of who they are and what they're keeping inside. And she talked a lot about this character in an interview I read and said that she was really interested in this idea of secrets and saying that what is lost or what we have to suppress when we refuse to acknowledge what lies beneath the surface. And I love that idea of her character just having so much underneath the surface that she can't break through. And so she's like squeezing her skin, to kind of stay remained. It's just, I agree. I think that character is just incredibly well written. And in some ways, it's strange because you're rooting for her by the end. Like she's kind of a horrible person or just like not a great person, not a fun person, not a positive, nice person. But by the end, you see her grow so much, but she's still the same person, but you see how she's changed through circumstances, like learning to be a different way. It's fascinating. What did you think? This is jumping way ahead, but I do think it's important to think about as far as her characters. What did you think about the ending? Because it ends in a very positive way.
Yeah, I mean, the ending was great. It I think it ties everything together perfectly. It's like it's a really smart way with like revealing more and more. I mean, I don't know. I think it like wrapped up in exactly the way that it should have. Are we going to talk
Yeah,
about it? Are we allowed to talk about it?
I think you
I
can
think so.
say spoilers
Yeah.
and then you can talk about it.
Well, yeah, I
As
mean,
long as you say spoilers, you can say anything.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we will be discussing spoilers. Yeah, I mean, I guess the way that the last layer of the onion like kind of is peeled back in terms of the plot at the toward the end, with the ownership of the house, and and I don't know that in that way, like I didn't really expect any of that to happen at the end. Like I didn't expect it at all, but it like made so much sense, which is kind of maybe the key to like a great story is like you don't expect it, but then once you see it or hear it, it makes so much sense. Like it's also crazy to think back on reading the majority of the book and not have put it together or had any thoughts about like
Yeah.
what was
Yeah.
really going
Yeah.
on, but I like didn't at all. So I think that's just, I mean, I think it was perfect. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, and I think it's like a sign of a huge accomplishment in a book when there is this big reveal that is going to come deep in the novel. You're not really expecting it. You kinda don't need it, and then when it happens, it enriches the story, and it adds this completely different layer, but it also does that thing that you're talking about, RJ, where you're like, "Wait, how did I not recognize this earlier on?" Because it is right there, but she didn't force it upon you, and then when the reveal happened, and I think from a historical standpoint, you know, she uses um an actual thing that happens, which is people were being sent when Jewish families were being sent to the concentration camps during World War II, their homes were basically just being repurposed for citizens. And people were taking them over with all belongings in there. Um, and then World War II ends. These families, the surviving families come back, start demanding and asking for their homes back, and they're not getting them back at all. And that's where this house, fits into this. And then, you know, that that aspect of it adds this whole societal layer to this book that I think it puts it in a position where you almost want to reread this with that knowledge in hand because I
Yeah,
imagine you would
totally.
see so much more than you saw the first time.
Did you both know about this? Like I didn't. Of course, I guess I imagine, but I did never had known about this as like a part of what happened during the displacement of the war. Like, like you're saying this, Brian, and when you talk about it, it's like, of course this happened, but it's amazing how Isabel's kind of awakening and reckoning kind of mirrors what happened to the Dutch population without, all of a sudden they're looking around thinking, yeah, why do we have this stuff? You know, and yeah, we love it and it's ours. We've been taking care of it. And I saw a quote where she was saying that loving a place does not make us the owners of it. And how Isabel feels like she loves this place and she takes such great care of it. Of course, it's hers. Of course, it's her family's, and how her whole family's history is tied up in this house. And the china is so evocative the whole time because she's also so like, you know, paranoid that people are stealing from her, which is so interesting. Is that maybe, you know, she knew that it never belonged to her in the first place. But I think it's incredible thinking about this reckoning with the Dutch government and how it handled itself during the war, basically giving the Jewish people to the Nazis without much of a fight. And also the Dutch history as colonizers. I mean, they have a very long, brutal history as a colonizing country. And as an author, van der Wouden is, I believe her father's Dutch and her mother's Israeli, and she moved from Israel when she was really young to the Netherlands and learned about all this stuff. And it must be so interesting to kind of reckon with that as part of your country's history. And it's something that I didn't know anything about. And so the whole reveal was fascinating to me. I had no idea this was going to happen. And it's so cool when you get to put the pieces back together again. Like, of course, the mother that came to the house is Eva's mother, banging on the door, trying to get in like 46. So, like 14 years before this story takes place. But I found it to be really smart how she was able to thread all of this together in a way that seems really effortless.
I mean, I think it showcases, because I had no idea of this. It showcases why World War II is just an endless mine of potential stories to be told, and if you can
Yeah.
tell it in this sort of manner where you have this, you know, kind of idea of ownership as a main theme of your book that also goes into, you know, ideas of love, sexual awakening, um, you know, simply just taking care of what you believe are your possessions, what you believe is your land, like all these sorts of sibling interactions, but having it all rooted in this one, essentially a crime that this next generation, for all intents and
Mm.
purposes, feels like they're not aware of. At least Issa's not aware of it. It's not something that she seems to remember happening as a kid, or at least throughout the majority of the book. And so the reckoning that comes with that and what she deals with as a result of this knowledge, it just adds a whole nother layer to this book that I found, um, you know, again, I was hooked up until this, and then you gave us this twist towards the end of it that adds a whole different layer that makes this, you know, reason why I think we all have this as 4 or 5-star book.
Yeah, and I think she could have, you know, it could have ended in like a much simpler way, right? I mean, it was never going to because of the setting and the time and all that. But even if it had ended with the fact that she was just like someone who was trying to, you know, somehow like con this family, it still would have been an awesome story, you know?
Yeah,
But like
totally.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
this layer, this extra kind of layer, it's wild. And I didn't know about that specific thing, although like you said, Megan, it makes sense, and it would make sense that happened. But in terms of the phenomenon, I mean, I listened to a couple interviews with her, and didn't hear her ever talk about like whether that was the impetus for the story or something else, because it's a,
Mm.
like you said, Brian, the well is endless basically for stories that based on what happened during this time. But you know, if you start from that point of like this happened to, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of families, like what else could you build from it, which I think is a pretty interesting idea. Because like what we haven't talked about yet is Ava, you know, and that whole relationship, which is a whole different thing that's amazing and really perfect. Just from the evolution of it, the way it starts, the way it ends. I mean, it just, man, I don't know. I don't even know where to go.
Well, before we jump to that, just one last thought I have about this, because I'm always taken back by the way that this book begins, where she's on her knees working in the garden, and she finds this broken piece of china, And it's this like layers of symbolism that I remember when I first started reading it, I was like, what am I in for here? Is this really, like, you guys had recommended it? It's on the, the booker list. Like, is this really something that I'm going to really feel like as I'm reading through it? And then you think back to that scene and this idea of her hands in the land that she owns, she believes that she owns. She finds a piece of china that represents theft and her own life that has been broken. But there's a whole nother layer to this, because it's not actually her land, it's not actually her china. And she has to deal with the ramifications of this as the book unfolds. Uh, you're talking about someone who, like, and for this to be a debut novel, like, they're just working with so many different layers all from the jump, without any sort of kind of unnecessary, you know ham-handedness, no kind of like overtones that just like feel too overwrought. It all works in such a exacting way that just blew me away.
And I think that first scene is intentionally Isabel being dirty. Like, her hands are dirty and in something, because she's so clean and tight and controlled, that I think that is a juxtaposition to who she is in a way that I think is another layer. And I think she's just such a brilliant writer for all the reasons we're talking about. But yeah, this ability to tell this historical story and this important thing that happened to people with the tone of this book is like romantic misery. I mean, it's like everything I ever want to read. It's like about the complexity of desire, and like the partnership between like suffering and pleasure, and like desire and frustration. And it's takes place in this like really hot, sweaty summer. And the way that she writes about sex and the relationship between these two women is so perfect. And I think there are two reasons why it's perfect. Well, there are many, but one of them is that she's super poetic. I just wrote down a couple of things that she wrote during her like this chapter 10, which is like the best chapter ever. So these are just a few of the phrases she has. The quickest bloom, a raindrop of a sound, a cushion of a touch. It made a pendulum swing low in her belly. A white noise hush, the drag of honey into lungs. Her heart went wide, went tight, a sugared slowness. She had grown a new shape. I mean, that is like, it's alliteration, it's personification, it's metaphor, it's repetition, it's such poetic language. Like, that is why, one of the reasons why her sex scenes are so good is because they're poetry. And the other reason is I was reading an interview about her, and she was talking about how a really good sex scene has little to do with like the movements or positions, but it has to do with how you got there and what the characters want from each other and what the stakes are. And she has all of the sex is really about what's going on between these two women. It's not really about the sex, right? It's about the experience that they're having and how forbidden it is. I mean, I also think that sometimes I read this book with a 2025 or 2024 perspective, when this book takes place in 1961. It is a long time ago. Like, this is not something that was happening out in the front. Like, her brother is like closeted, kind of, they're acting like they don't know that Hendrik is actually gay. And so there's so much forbiddenness in it. And I think her ability to raise the stakes and make it all about the situation as opposed to just the sex is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, you get this part of the book was really just outstanding, because it's a lot of shadows, and she does a really amazing job of writing about that feeling you have when you are just past tipsy and are willing to do something out of your norm,
Mm.
and you want something and it's right there, and yet you're still like, I don't think I should. This is not okay. And it allows you this opportunity to really think about that feeling, that moment, and she just lingers in that space in such a way that I don't know. I was absolutely blown away by the middle part of this book. I mean, I'm going to keep saying this. I was blown away by this whole book, but if you shrink it down to these kind of scenes where there's this awakening happening for both of them, and there's this love being felt and shared by both of them, and the way that she describes this and the way that she walks you through this, I don't know, you feel like you're right there in a way that almost it doesn't feel like you're intruding upon anyone. It feels as though you're just strung along for the ride while you're reading through this, and you feel that sense of like someone, like she said, my body grew a new part, or my body grew a new shape. Like that feeling is
Yeah.
throughout this.
Yeah, it's a very claustrophobic feeling at times. Like, I felt like when I think about this book, I think about being in like the hallway of the house. Like, there's like
Mhm.
a tightness to it that is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and she does the, obviously the juxtaposition of the two characters is what also makes them coming together more interesting, right? It's like
Yes.
she's, they're like every single aspect of each of them are exactly the opposite of the other one, and she does such a good job of drawing that out and making it so clear that everything that Isabel like expects out of a person, Ava is not, and I think that's what makes them, like you said, what's at stake and the kind of the reasons that they're there and how they got there. I mean, it's just really, it's pretty wild. There's one quote where I think it's probably in that same section where she says, God help me, she looks at me, God help me, I don't want her to look away. And it's like part
Yeah.
of this longer paragraph about her. Like, there's a lot of like fruit and eating metaphors too, as it relates to their relationship, and reflected
Yeah.
on the cover of the book too. But just like setting up these, like, I mean, in a simple way, it's like it's like the opposites attract idea, but it's so much more complex and layered than that. But that is the basic idea, right? You take these two people who are completely opposite, and then you find out throughout the book that their reasons for being so different are so different from what you expected. So I think that's the, to me, the layer of that makes it the most interesting, is that you think that they're so different for one reason, but it turns out that they're so different for another reason, and that's just like another amazing quality to the writing.
The scene where Issa comes home and Ava is sitting at the kitchen table with her basically servant, and
Yeah.
she's gotten her drunk, and they're hanging out and they're playing cards, and they're just
Yeah.
like, she
And
sees
you're
no
like, no,
problem with this.
don't, I can't believe you did this.
But like,
Yeah.
it's that sensation of like you have like a guest staying with you, and they just see, they're on different time than you are. They aren't working. They're here. And so they see like this house with things that can be consumed and people who are here that they can interact with and hang out with. Um, I mean, it reminded me of, I have a friend who lives in Alaska and will come down here to stay with us for kind of weeks on end as he does like tours around the lower 48, and then he'll go back. And when he's here, your entire schedule is thrown off because you walk inside and he's just hanging out at the kitchen table, just like ongoing conversations, invited another friend over. And like, I'm on like a very rigid schedule in my life, which like I related a lot to the main character in this book, and like the level of tense like organization she has on a day-to-day basis, like don't ever get me out of that type of thing. um and she comes home and immediately she sees everything she's dreaded, which is just like casual fun. That's all that it is, and yet it's the worst possible thing for her, and it opens up so much of the inner conflict in the book.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's what. Sorry, I would, Megan, before you. That's like kind of what I was just saying, Brian. Is like you could do that in a very simple way, and it would be like
Oh yeah.
very cliche, right? You take these like the worst possible thing that could happen to that.
The Odd Couple.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's basically what it is, but it's just so elegantly done that it doesn't feel like that.
Because I
Nope.
think the stakes are higher, and she's playing with this idea, at least in my opinion, of like revulsion and desire, and how like close they can be, and how someone who's so tightly wound, when they actually get like let loose, how intense that can be. Like that moment when she grabs Ava's shoulder for the first time, she grabs her elbow, sorry, not her shoulder, her elbow, and you can feel that through the page. Like, because you know it's just so like out of character for her to do that. And then you can feel like Ava's response, and they just have this like electric moment, and they're in this like tight hallway. And I think that she's developed the character so believably up to that point that the stakes are just so high. And I think that her character development, I mean, we could just everything in this book is great, but that is really special. And I think the way that she turns it on its head in the end, and how you get Eva's perspective by reading Ava, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, um, by reading her diary. So I love that part of the book where Isabel finds her diary and then reads it, and you just discover a totally different person than Ava's kind of pretended to be. You find out this sort of desperate, like, person who is just struggling to survive after their family had been through so many horrible things during the war. And you see her grabbing at straws, and you see her formulating this plan. And it's incredible to kind of finally get her perspective, because the whole time I was kind of wondering what she thought of the affair. Like, was it a playing a part? Did she really fall in love too? And to me, it was fascinating to have it presented in that way in her voice.
Yeah, it's a move that I think it either works or it doesn't in a book or a movie.
Yeah.
That kind of like, you've experienced all of this, now let's relive it and see it in kind of a condensed format from a slightly different perspective. I thought it worked brilliantly here because I feel like she reads the diary because she feels as though it was stolen from her. And so, well, me stealing
Mhm.
her memories and her insights, what is that? And then she realizes how much she's actually inadvertently stolen from her life. But yeah, I mean, I think it was necessary structurally. Otherwise, you're just seeing one perspective in this, and you desperately need multiple perspectives in this book. And rather than jumping from their character perspective throughout, like some other books that we've talked about have done, this gives you one main character who is the main character, and then it kind of flips that on its head for a brief period towards the end, which adds a ton of depth to it. Plus, you also see that like an affair like this, it isn't one-sided. You know, it's not
Yeah.
just Lisa's awakening. It's, oh no, I've fallen for this person as well. And what does that mean then, as as Ava's trying to live out this plan that she's concocted in her own head to reclaim her life that was taken from her when she was a child. And then you start to get into this debate of like, who's right here? Is it her home that she should get again? Is it her life that should be saved in this sort of manner? Or is it, this is what happened to your life and you have to move on as well, in the same way that this character does? You have to wrestle with a lot by reading that.
Yeah.
I saw some questions. RJ, did you have something you want to say about that?
Oh no, I was just I had another like kind of piece of it that I wanted to throw out there, but I want to hear your questions.
No, do it.
Well,
I
I
was going
think
to
that
transition us, so I want to hear it.
I think that the fact that she ends up in the mom's room and like against the wishes of everyone is like an important part of the building of the tension. So like if she was just in like a random guest room, I think it would have been different. But it like, and then later as the story unfolds, it like symbolizes so much, because that's kind of like the ownership of the house, and then she finds out that she's, everything that she thought about it, the house was turned on its head. But I think without that like part that really sets her off in the beginning of her staying in the mom's room, it wouldn't have had that same amount of kind of tension at the beginning.
Well, it adds one other thing that, like, there's a moment where she's talking to her brother about how she shouldn't be staying there, and her brother's like, what is your deal? Like, why are you so uptight about everything?" And it's this, like, this tension a character like that feels where they have small elements of control, and they don't fully realize that they've, like, built their life around controlling all elements of it, but they have this small little element of control here, and they want to retain it, and they want everyone else to understand, like, I need this, like, I can't have this person staying here. And everyone else in her life is just like, well, who cares? Like, it's just a room that's available, why can't she stay there? And that lack of understanding, that lack of empathy from the character, from her siblings and from other people in her lives, in her life, seem to add to, like, this tension as it builds. It's just fascinating.
Well, and the fact that the house isn't Isabel's either is interesting. Like, it doesn't belong to her.
Yeah,
It's gonna go to
yeah.
her brother. When he marries,
Right.
she's out. That's kind of like the idea, and so she knows that. So she's, like, ferociously grasping at it, feeling like, "I have to have this." And it's interesting, that part in the end of the book when she starts to get really desperate and kind of figures out what happened, and she goes to her uncle and asks, like, "How did we get this house?" Like, and he's like, "Don't worry about it. Like, we just got it, and don't fight it, and it's fine." And then she asks for the house to be hers so that she can give it to Ava, we find out, but it's never hers either, which I think is also, like, really comes down on her, like, twice as hard when she realizes Ava's claim to it as well.
When I think that part of it too is that, like, there is this level of, obvious patriarchy that exists, right, in that time, which was like her as the one daughter was like never going to have the house,
Yeah.
but it turns out that, like, the power struggle over the whole course of the book is between these two women, and the men are like so peripheral to all of it,
Yeah. Yeah,
you
very
know.
much so.
Well, she has this idea that, like, well, if I work hard enough and I keep the house, in as good of condition, I will earn it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Ava has the
Mhm.
same sense of, like, well, if I convince them that my story was more tragic than theirs and that I'm deserving of this, then I will earn it. But, like, the reality is, like, behind the scenes, this has already been dealt with in a manner that makes it that much more complex and out of their control.
And I love how Ava's, like, slowly sending things back. She's slowly taking pieces of her family's history and, like, mailing it back so that she will have that. Because I think the goal seemed like, to me, her goal wasn't to get the house, it was to get the things. Because she knew she probably wouldn't be able to get the house. So she thought, and that's why she has this, like, list of everything that she's trying to get back. And that's what starts driving, like, Isabel mad, is because things start going missing, and, she blames the maid, and she's, like, convinced that something's going wrong. And I love that. That's where it feels to me, well, there's many reasons why it feels like Rebecca, but that is one reason why there's this thing that's happening that you don't understand, but it's bigger than what you imagine it to be. But everybody seems to be in on it, and there's, like, a sense of paranoia that grows. There's so many layers to this book. It's amazing. One thing I did have want to ask you about was, I saw some writing about it that were saying they didn't love the pacing of it, that it said it was uneven or slow in parts. I have a very strong feeling about that, but I want to know what you guys think before I share my thoughts. Did that ever hit you as slow? Brian, what do
Well,
you
I
think?
just
Oh,
go ahead,
RJ, go
Brian.
ahead.
I want to say that 270 pages is like a beautiful gift of a length of a novel. Like,
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
it's like, what are we doing here? 270 pages, like that. It's almost. I mean, that's no. I did not feel that.
Yeah, I didn't either. I'm 270 pages for, like, a movie that's like 100 or an hour and 37-minute movie. Like, when I'm searching around what to watch and I see that, I'm like, cool. I don't care what this is, I'm in. I think it's really hard for, like, a 270-page book to feel long, which is part of the challenge I had with the last book I read, which was 256 pages and felt interminable. Um, I think that, yeah, this book messes with pacing totally. I think that there are moments where it feels longer and slower, and in moments where, like, so much information is coming out and so much is happening. But I don't feel like that's I wouldn't agree with that as criticism. I would think of that as very intentional to how you're supposed to feel, in the same way that, like, if you watch certain movies, there's maybe, an introduction couple of scenes that feel very quick and feel like they take you, and then some slower parts where you spend more time with characters in smaller moments. I felt like this book did that in a really nice way. So, um, totally agree that the pacing is uneven, but I think that that's all intentional and serves the book really well.
Yeah, I agree. I felt like you did, both of you did too, and I agree, RJ. I think that there's this like slow tension building up to the climax when you figure out what's happening, and then after that, there's kind of like a roller coaster ride down to the end, which I think is exactly, it's kind of like story structure 101. But I thought it was paced beautifully. I mean, to me, that's like, what you want in a story is like a slow build and then like a quick ending. And it was funny because when I was thinking more about the ending yesterday, I was thinking about, I could see a world where people found a problem with the ending because it is kind of a happy ending in that the women find each other and decide to be together, and live in this house together. But I think it works. I think it works really well.
Yeah. I guess there's a bit of like predictability and a bit of too sunny of an ending, but again, I don't know. How would you want the book to end? Like, would you want Ava
I
to have
know.
taken the house back? Would you want Issa to realize, like, actually, now that I've had this sexual awakening, I'm just gonna go and experiment with other women, and you can take your stuff and get out of here? Like, how would you want? How are we supposed to have this
She
book
seems like a
end?
one woman kind of gal.
Very
I
much so.
mean,
Like she's done. There's no other searching.
so are these the same people who didn't like the ending of the bee sting because it didn't tell us what happened? I mean, what do
Probably,
we?
probably,
I mean, I think
exactly.
I think the lesson
This is
though
the
is that like
problem. You
no
have to
matter
do
what,
something.
no matter
Yeah.
what, people are going to be. I mean, I still don't really think it's a happy ending. I mean,
It's
it's
kind of
like
sad. Yeah.
the tragedy of the thing that's amazing about the ending, I think, is that the tragedy of the entire precipitating events leading up to the loss of the house become more clear as you get closer to the end. So it
Mm.
becomes like more
Yeah.
sad and heavy at the end once you learn more about what happened before the book even started, which I think is a crazy feat.
Yeah.
It
And
also like, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say this scene where they're the very last scene they have together, Isabel's like on her knees, like begging Ava. And there's a real desperation, and it's a to me a perfect balance of the power imbalance shifting.
Mm.
Like in the beginning of the book, like Ava's constantly trying, like Isabel's kind of asserting her power constantly, and Ava is kind of poking her about it. And at the end, you see Isabel on her knees, like clinging to her and begging her. And I just thought that was, it was almost like a form of justice in a way.
Yeah, I see that. I think it's also like you can have both of these characters represent and it obviously gets complicated, but like that the dinner scene early on, Ava is this modern 60s woman that is out there. She's experimenting, she's dating around, she knows culture, she's full of life. And Issa's kind of, this 1950s reformed, you know, living by herself, not really out, doesn't have a social life. And, the 60s is this era in Western Europe and America where culture just explodes for these young people. Like, this is the generation that is going to benefit from the post-war booms. And you see them living very different lives in this sort of standpoint. And that obviously changes as you go through the book. It also does a really good job of making you question at so many points whether or not Ava's intentions are pure, whether or not she's a good person, whether or
Hmm.
not there's kind of evil, scammy nature to what she's doing. And then you start to realize her own life and what has been taken from her. And so now your own perspective on both characters are flipped in that standpoint, which also, if you think about that from a macro level, makes you think about, just the way the Western world emerged from World War II, what was right, what was wrong, who had power, who did not, how did those who had power use it, what happened when those who had power tried to use it for good versus when they tried to use it in really inhumane and awful ways. I could just keep going. I love this so much. No, I wrote that. I wrote down, in our outline, like, what did this book not do well? And I just wrote, I pretty much thought this was a perfect book. Like, I don't know anything I would have like
Yeah.
overtly asked to be different, because I think one of you said it. This is just one of those you pick up, you don't totally know what you're getting into, and within 20-25 pages, you're like, cool, I'm sold. I don't care if this is not my type of book. This is a great book that I need to finish.
Brian, I just want to go back to the beginning, what just the scene at the dinner that you mentioned, because there's one of the cool things about the book is like there's no hint at all of any amount of attraction that Isabel feels toward her at the beginning, and she makes
Yeah.
the comments about how, like, her lipstick is like on crooked, and there's like these little things that are just like she's just like kind of disgusting to her, but I guess later on, like you said, Megan, that line is thin, but it's just it would have been easy to like have her be somewhat attracted to her at the beginning, but it's like it's just so much
Totally.
better that doesn't exist at all.
Yeah, apparently this book started out of a short story based on that dinner scene of three
Makes sense.
siblings who went to dinner, and one of them brings someone that the other people don't like. And that this whole book kind of came out of that, which is amazing, and also really like incredible to think about how important it is to write short stories, or just write, because it can become something so much larger.
Yeah,
And this really did.
shit's
It's
crazy.
an interesting commentary on attraction as well, because it kind of, I think you're right, RJ. It would have been so easy for her to like notice her under a certain light and like feel tension. Oh, what is that? I've never felt that before. And instead, it's her just picking this woman apart, and it's her nitpicking things she doesn't like about her, which in turn, you're thinking about this person, even if they're negative thoughts. You're thinking, what I can, why does my brother care about this person? Why is this person, going to be an important part of my life? Well, you're thinking about them because you're already feeling that, even if you're not aware of it.
And those women are all set up to be adversaries to Isabel, because if he gets married, she's out. So
Right.
she's never going to like these women. She's probably never liked any of them. And so I love thinking about that. And yeah, she's such a good writer to not telegraph that or like foreshadow that. I hadn't really thought about that, RJ. It's so true. Like, I think a lesser writer would have made like a little comment in there that was like,
Yeah.
foreshadowed that.
Yeah.
Well, and to that, her brother, you get this reveal of him as kind of just this absolute jerk. He's just, I don't know if I would say jerk, but like he's just dating around. He realizes at a certain point, like, I can't do it with this woman anymore. You got to get her out of here. And he's just like trying to push Issa to get rid of her. And already something has flipped where, Issa goes through this period of wondering, am I betraying my brother's confidence by sleeping with this woman? And that in and of itself, there's no betrayal really even happening, because his brother doesn't even really want this person anymore. My God.
This book is so good.
Love
Is there
it.
a lasting
Love it.
image? RJ, do you have a lasting image from this book?
Not one that I can share on the podcast. No, I think
Same.
the kitchen scenes are really important, I think, to the book. There's the one that Brian mentioned. There's like there's several images. There's several scenes, where they're both like either eating, or one of them is eating or drinking something and the other isn't. And I think those, like, the way those change throughout the story kind of like sets the tone for the book. So I guess it's just more of an image of the house, is the kitchen.
How about you, Brian?
Yeah. Late nights, shadows, the thrill of an illicit affair. That's it. That's the vibe. That's the memory. I mean, I've got a pretty strong attraction to Holland and to the Netherlands, and this book did a really good job of just highlighting how wet everything is, the greenery, the home construction, what it feels like. I mean, they still ride those old bikes from like the 40s throughout the cities in Holland. Um, yeah, I mean, there's so much. This book was incredible. Read this at all costs.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Real professional over here.
Happens.
Yeah, it's just all of what you were saying. I think to me it was that sticky, sweaty feeling when it's the summer, it's humid out, it feels humid inside, the doors are like swollen a little bit, and I kept seeing them in when they're like passing each other, but the heat is there, and I kept imagining them in the hallways, and yeah, it's
Mm.
this book is I would recommend rereading chapter 10. Just I did it last night. It's quite an enjoyable way to spend the evening. This book is absolutely fantastic. Any books or movies like this you want to recommend?
Well, I have one. I have a movie,
Exciting.
The Handmaiden.
Yeah, there it is.
So
There it
true.
Right?
So
That's the
true.
one.
Finally can bring up a movie. Yes.
God, that
Um,
movie. Talk about hot.
Yeah. I
Yes,
mean,
please.
it does kind of, it has a
Also
lot
World
of
War
similar
II
vibes.
related as well.
Yeah.
Mystery, intrigue, period piece. Definitely. Totally. I love
Yeah.
that comp.
I would recommend Tony Judd's post-war, but it doesn't have the tension or the heat that this book does. It's just a great account of Europe after World War II from 1945 to about 2005. But no heat, no sexual
It's
tension,
okay.
just amazing detailed information on economics and infrastructure and NATO and what happens to a country after, or to a continent after it goes to war for 8 of 40 years.
Megan,
Yeah.
well, I want to ask you, do you see any relation to the intermezzo with this?
Yes, the darkness, the shadowy nature of it. Um, I think having them both take place in Europe too. I think the sibling relationships. Yeah, I
Yeah, I
definitely
feel like
can
there's
see
like a
that.
little bit there, but it's
There's a
very
little bit
different also.
there. Yeah, I mean, intermezzo is like that whole book takes place in the rain, right? And I
Yeah.
don't think it rains in one big scene in this book, which I really love, but it's not as rainy as I think intermezzo. But yeah, I like that comp. My comp was well, Rebecca, but I think we've talked about that. Just a book where a house plays a really important role, and it's all about tension and sexual intrigue and a mystery and all the things that are unspoken. I love it. But I also think the movie Zone of Interest is an interesting comp because it's like the Zone of Interest is a movie about the horrors of World War II, but from another angle. It's an indirect angle. So in that movie, you are living with the commander who's in charge of Auschwitz, and the whole movie takes place in his house, which is right next door to Auschwitz. But they never show you inside of Auschwitz, but you hear it and you can almost smell it, and it's that movie is so intense. If you have not seen that movie, I cannot recommend it enough. Absolutely blew my mind. But I think in the same way that she's has you looking at this part of history and from a different angle.
I know it's a really good comp. And that movie does a really good job of playing around with the domestic questions of World War
Yes.
II and how people survived that by continuing to create whatever normalcy was possible, even as they were doing horrible things. That movie's unbelievable. Yeah,
Yeah, I
I'm
think that idea of displacement,
yeah.
and how it affects people, we didn't really talk about that, but I think that's a major theme in the book, but this idea of, like, how it affects people who are displaced and those who are doing the displacing. I think that's, like, a big theme of that movie and this book as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's an amazing scene in the Zone of Interest where the husband and wife are having this debate over what they should do. Should he? I think he had just received a promotion, um, or a reassignment, and they're, you know, recanting all of these things that they have done at the will of the Nazi Party, and they're not doing it because they're not saying it because of, um, you know, what they've done for the state, what they've done for their family, how they've created an opportunity for their family. And I think that you get aspects of this within this book of, you know, Isa's family did this for their own safety, for their own well-being. And so there's this back-ended justification you have to wrestle with throughout reading this book that movie does really well. But we could go on for another 2.5, 3 hours here. There's so much to say. We could just read chapter 10 for you all to end this book. But I think that we have to allow you all to read this and have the same experience, or yell at us for what we got wrong here.
Yes, we have to go, but next week we'll be back. We're going to talk about The Chaser from Stag Dance by Tori Peters. And in the meantime, I hope everyone reads this book and enjoys the heat. You're welcome. We'll see you next week.